Good afternoon. So as an entrepreneur, it is critical to accept that sometimes even the smallest change will disrupt organizational culture. That's just true. Now, not all change is as impactful as, say, for instance, a change in leadership, or maybe the launch of a new product or a new service, decreasing revenue, increasing revenue, and even the strategic planning process. These are larger changes, ostensibly. But all of them have the potential to disrupt change. I'll give you a good example. I once worked with an organization that was looking to increase productivity. And of course we went through and looked at all of the operational ways that could happen. We tweaked this here and that there where we could, but I suggested one other thing, and that was, why don't we figure out how to demonstrate appreciation in a cost-effective way for the employees to see if that would increase productivity. So the employer liked that idea, and he actually built out a break room for the employees. But that actually created a whole different set of cultural problems. For one, who was going to clean that kitchen, right? Who was going to wipe that refrigerator down? Was it okay to actually work in the break room? And finally, who got control of the remote on the flat screen? These are problems, right? In fact, it almost caused a mini war among the employees, but that was solved later. But change, honestly, has to come with a sustainability plan, no matter how small or how large. Strategic planning is a good example of that. That causes leadership sometimes to sweat, because strategic planning, we all know we need one, but we don't always know how to maximize it once we have it. And that causes sometimes people to worry about whether we're creating a document that will gather dust on a shelf, or is this something we're going to be able to use? And strategic planning actually disrupts culture as well. It should, that's its job. Okay. I actually have reasons why strategic planning is the perfect process. And a lot of times, a strategic plan, it's more important to go through the process than actually have an end result. Why? For one, it creates opportunity, vehicles, for teamwork and actual input. It allows people who participate in that process to actually be creative problem solvers. You have an opportunity to look at your organization like an organism or a system. How do we intersect? How does the work that we do intersect by department with partners and others? And there's engagement. So if it's done right, you actually have a chance for a transparent process, and you're engaging stakeholders at all levels. And then, of course, in the end, there should be process efficiency. If not, you've done something wrong. That's what it's all about. And finally, opportunities should present themselves around resources and relationships that help to advance the organization. But the question is, what are the dysfunctions that can happen if you don't have a sustainability plan in place or strategy in place? About 30 years ago, a strategist, a world-renowned strategist by the name of Dr. Mary Lippitt, she actually researched change and what kinds of elements had to be present. She talked about there being 5 dysfunctions that happen in an organization, internally and externally, if all of the process is not comprehensive. This is what it looked like: confusion, anxiety, false starts I've seen before. A little story there. I actually worked for an organization that was really great at visioning, fantastic at visioning. It was a nonprofit organization. And nonprofits, by design, should be very clear on their vision and should be easy to get to one. For one thing, the question should be, what do we need to do to put ourselves out of business? It's a strange question, right? But if you think about it, if the nonprofit is about human services and their objective is to actually make sure that people are independent and prosperous and healthy, their question should be, what makes us unnecessary? What do we have to do so that we don't have to be here anymore? So it should have been easy. But this particular organization wasn't very good at the blueprint part, meaning that all stakeholders involved didn't necessarily know the action plan. So what would happen is, great vision, and then the leadership would say, we're going in that direction over there, the entire organization would turn, walk in that direction. The next thing you know, they'd say, ooh, this trend over here looks good. And then we'd turn as an organization and go that way, and we went on and on and on. So what we ended up with was false starts. We'd start out this way and stop. We'd go that way and we would stop. And that's actually how false starts get in the way of progress, and they're not sustainable. There are actually 6 elements that I believe to be most important for sustainability. The first one is vision. That seems pretty obvious, but I see 2 paths with vision. The first path is, that's who we want to become. The second path is, that's what we want to be doing. Sometimes they're 2 different things, sometimes they're the same. The other one is that blueprint, which is actually an action plan, right? That is, how will we get to that vision? What kinds of tactics will we employ? What will we do to get there? What's the accountability? What are our benchmarks? It's the blueprint. Resources, of course, are another one, another element. And resources always look like money. They always look like money. But in addition to revenue, resources are also time, access, staffing. And that brings me to expertise. So you have staff, but they also have to be trained. They have to have the ability to actually fulfill what you're asking them to do. And that reminds me of another quick story. I actually worked right out of graduate school for a telecommunications company in Connecticut. And this company, I thought I was big time because I walked out of graduate school and I had this great title. It was Manager of Investor Relations and Communications, Internal and External. I thought, ooh, I've made it big now. This was big. Turns out, though, that when I joined this organization, just before that, they had 11,000 employees. Now they had 1,100. The reason they had 10% of their employment force is because they had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. They were in a reorganization, and they had just been purchased by the Marmon Group out of Chicago. So this little freshman, right out of graduate school, had to deal with angry investors. And I would tell you about that, except that that's going to take another time and probably over drinks. We're not going to talk about that today. But I had to deal with some employees. Those were the essentials. 1,100 people out of 11,000, that's essential, right? So I had to make sure they had enough information to stay. So I had this really rough boss. He was a CEO from Jersey. He used to talk real rough and drink whiskey. He was kind of an interesting character. And he said to me, Joscelyn, the most important thing you can have in any organization is making sure you have the right butts in the right seats. I never forgot that. It was so crude, but I thought it was good. He's explaining this right here. It's expertise. You can have seats, you can have butts, but if they're not in the right seats and they're not the right butts, then you don't have expertise, right? And motivation is next. Motivation does not have to necessarily come in the form of money, although of course that's the interest. It would be salary and benefits. But motivation is just like the story I talked about with the break room. And that eventually worked out. They came up with some policies and some incentives that said that if you sign up and clean up this break room for a full week, you'll get an extra hour of lunch next week. That's a nice incentive. Sometimes it comes that way. And finally, ongoing evaluation. This is the one that's usually missed. With the first 5, you have change, but only with evaluation, ongoing evaluation, do you have sustained progress. It's impossible. And ongoing progress is usually the one that's most dismissed when a change plan is being put together. It's usually the one that's missed. So checklists on ongoing evaluation. If you've got the first 5, the vision, the blueprint, you've got the resources, motivation, ongoing evaluation actually is focused on intended outcome. Your whole organization needs to be focused on the intended outcome. And there are assessment tools out there, software that can help you with ongoing evaluation. But I like a good old-fashioned involvement and engagement of everybody in the organization, so that priorities become like big rocks that you break into pebbles. And then everybody is meeting. You actually structure your meetings and you back out of dates when things are due. And everybody is meeting about those priorities, from the external stakeholders, or the folks who deal with external people like marketing, to the internal like IT. Everyone is talking about the same priorities. So the next time leadership is faced with the challenge of, let's say, replacing a manager who is a people person with a manager who's more of a numbers person, because that's what you need at the time, or perhaps the next time leadership is trying to get employees to look at an intranet as opposed to waiting for a paper newsletter. Or maybe it's something external, like your marketing team having to introduce a new way to access products and services. Just remember that every last one of those events is better with a sustainability plan. And developing and integrating those 6 essential elements is the best way to create sustainable change. Thank you.